Good evening. Please continue with your dinner and your conversations. I'd like, though, to get us off on time. Thank you for being here this evening. We are proud that we're able to host a great conversation, a little bit edgy, called Road Rage, but frankly about the issues that we're going to see discussed tonight. We thank you for being with us here tonight. Hopefully you've enjoyed dinner. We are always proud to bring these issues forward so we can discuss the issues without taking sides, but I think what you'll hear tonight is a good range of speakers talking about the traffic and pedestrian issues that we have in our city. We appreciate you being here. As I said, this has gone on now for 20 years. Agenda Alexandria is 20 years old. It's been going on for years. We put over 160 programs together. We have one more program, which is next month. Last program for the season. More on that in a moment. But we've been doing this for about 20 years, 160 programs. And on June 10th this year, June 10th, at Temple Bethel, we're going to have our 20th anniversary reception. We always shy away from gala, but go ahead and dress up and party. It's on the 10th of June at the Temple Bethel. We're looking forward to that event. We're going to celebrate not just the people that are with us tonight, but also the people that helped create and shape this program for those 20 years. A lot of old friends, a lot of old members of the board. Happy to be with us. We're very happy that David Speck is our honorary chairman. You'll receive an invite from him. All of us who are members of Agenda certainly will be invited, but we're happy that we're able to invite many of the friends of Agenda as part of the program. So again, that's June 10th. 3 to 6 p.m. That'll be a fundraiser as well. That'll be primarily through sponsorships and advertising. We have a special program. We're very happy that Zebra, the publication, is helping us lay out a great program, kind of a commemorative and a keepsake. And in that program, you have an opportunity to advertise and recognize your support for Agenda Alexandria. We have a sponsor program. There's more information that we'll be sending along, and that'll be important for us to really build another 20 years worth of energy and, oh, by the way, money in the bank so that we can put this program on and continue to take the issues that come daily our way and discuss them in a way that's constructive for our community. Tickets will be $25 each. You can buy tickets and come, and we've got lots of space, and we expect to have a good crowd, good representation of the community, and a great representation of Agenda Alexandria, I would say old and new, but former and present, because we're all glad to have you with us. Speaking of the fundraising we're doing for Agenda Alexandria, you'll see on your table, Spring to Action. There's cards that look like this on your table about Spring to Action. Spring to Action is, as we all, I believe, know, is a donation and fundraising activity that goes on each year. And on April 25th, is the one day of the year in which you can actually donate online to Spring to Action. But we all ask you, please, on the back side of that, if you put Agenda Alexandria on the back side, so it's Spring to Action, my eyes don't, springtoaction.org// Agenda Alexandria, and the little card is here to remind you about that. It's a great cause. It serves the community. It feeds back to organizations like ours and others, and we ask you to consider taking that card with you to remind you what you're going to be doing on the 25th. There's an award at the end of the day. That's who gets the most and who's had donated the most. I would say we all win, so we would like, however, you to remember Agenda Alexandria. We have, as well, tonight, I would like to thank Bittersweet. We had questions about how much vegetarian, and we gave you lots of vegetarian tonight. Hopefully it was satisfying for you. It was awfully good. Thanks to Bittersweet, our food sponsor that helps us, gives us a great price on a good meal, and we're happy they're with us again. A special thanks as well to the Hermitage. This building where you're at, we couldn't ask for more in terms of the support they give us and the price they give us, quite frankly. We've had an opportunity to move around the city to 2 other locations. It's interesting. It's good. We're not going to stop. But I tell you, this is like coming back to a place that seems to serve our purpose well, and we're very happy to be, again, with the Hermitage team. T.C. Williams, are you in the house? All right, in the house. We're filming as usual. That comes up on YouTube. You should enjoy the presentation now and ask your friends to enjoy it later on our YouTube channel. Thank you, TC, for your TV and media program. Somewhere near graduation, I think, coming up. Somewhere, perhaps. Got any seniors there? Oh, no. Okay. All right. One. Okay. Oh, there he is. A senior? All right. All right. He's smiling. Big smile up here. We ask you, if you are a member of Agenda Alexandria and you don't have the program book, Donna has some more program books for you. It's been almost a whole year now. Please pick up your program books because they're going to be out of date and collector's items in about a month and a half. Additionally, we'd like to thank our sponsors that are with us tonight. Katie is here. I know I saw her out there. We have some of our sponsors are with us in the audience. We're glad to have you with us. I'd like to recognize some of those sponsors that are here or not here. We have a variety. Paul is here. He's here that works in the nonprofit sector. He's our treasurer, Alexandria Chamber of Commerce. I'm not sure they're here. The Financial Literacy Center, Florence, wasn't able to make it. We have just reading here who we might have that I've seen. I don't see Gant Redmond. This is a notable evening. Gant is always with us and always been supportive, as has Simpson Development, also the Life and Estate Planning Law Center with Barbara Anderson. We have Donnie Simpson in the Simpson Development with us normally. State Farm, don't see them here tonight. We've got Connie here, thank you. We've got as well Woods Landscaping and Sprinkler Service. I'd like to take credit for that, but I can't. And Zebra Newspaper, always willing to publish our program, and we thank them for that. Members of the board, could we ask you to raise a hand? Our members of the board, always with us, always supportive, and in fact, this is an activist. Frank, you're a member. Raise your hand there. He's taking notes. We're thankful for our board. It's a very activist board, and they're involved in putting these programs on together for us. I should mention no elected representatives, but I've seen at least 3 candidates. I probably missed one, but at least Dennis is with us here. School board. City School Board is here. Thank you for coming. I saw Robert is here. Robert Ray is here. And I saw Matt. Didn't I see Matt? Then Matt is here. Oh, and Elizabeth hiding behind Dennis. Sorry, Elizabeth. And board member that you are. Yes, Dennis. And Dennis, we got. And Chris Hubbard. Thank you very much. Okay, and please get around. And it's an opportunity to meet some of the candidates coming up pretty quickly, 12 June. Okay. We have a next program I want to talk about just briefly. It's Remember the Titans. It's really a focus on T.C. Williams as it's made progress from its founding back in 1967 to now. All the programs they have, the opportunities to present for our students, and a bit of the challenges. But it's really a remarkable program been put together that allows us to talk to leadership there. It's not just about the athletics, it's also the academics. We're very thankful for what we've got in that school. I'm very proud to present it next week, or next program next month. It's the last Monday of the month. So with that said, I'd like to turn the program over now to get going on our road rage topic, but more importantly, a conversation about something that concerns us all, pedestrian and traffic safety. Janet, as co-chair of putting the program together, it's all over to you.
Well, thank you, Bob, and let me echo Bob's welcome to all of you. Thanks for being here tonight. So tonight we're going to learn a little bit about coping skills. How do we cope with cars, with bicycles, with people who are walking, with people who are just sitting there watching the traffic go by? There's a lot of things happening in our city that is 15 square miles big. Frank asked me to call City Hall today to find out how many registered vehicles we have, and it's like, he'll talk about it later. It's about 131,000 registered vehicles, and we have about 150,000 people living here, maybe 160,000. So that's like one car to everybody, except maybe sans 20 or 30,000. It's a lot of vehicles on our 15 square miles. Nevertheless, we have a wonderful panel selected to speak to us tonight. And we're just going to get going on this, if you will, ride. So, Frank, that was a joke. Frank is going to be our moderator tonight, and he will take care of the introductions of our panel members. Thanks again for being here, and welcome to all of our panel members. And enjoy the program. Thanks for being here.
All right. Well, thank you, Janet. Well, once again, thank all of you for being here, and we have a very important topic tonight that is pertinent to our city. As Janet mentioned, we have a lot of people living in a small area here in Alexandria City. For years, people would take their cars to get around. 35 years ago, the metro came to town. Now we have bikes, we have walkers, we have people going around town, reading their cell phones, walking into the streets. We just have a whole bunch of different things going on here in the city. And we're very lucky to have 4 different so-called experts or panelists here with us tonight. And the way we're going to do this program is I'm going to introduce, well, let me do that right now. I'm going to introduce all 4 of them generally, and then they're going to talk for about 5 minutes or so on a special interest or a special project that they've been working on here in the city, or where their depth of knowledge is. And then from there, I have a lot of questions we're going to roll into, and please, we want to have questions from the crowd. So as things pop up, please write them down, and you'll be able to pass them forward to us here to read the questions. So we have Linda Couture, Jim Durham, Jan Lambert, and Lisa Porter. So we're going to start with Linda, and Linda's going to tell us a little bit about her background and some of her specialties. Linda's been involved with the Old Town Civic for years. She's on the ad hoc, or was on the ad hoc Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee, and she's worked very closely with a lot of the group at City Hall to work on implementing pedestrian plans in Alexandria. So with that, Linda, let's turn it over to you for a few minutes on just some of your general thoughts and anything you want to share with the group.
Good evening. Is this on? When I moved here, is it on?
Just need to be a little closer.
When I moved here in 1976 and moved on to North Union Street, the traffic was so much less than it is today. We were worried about people, biking down the street with their dogs. Today, you couldn't possibly do that. So one of my earliest initiatives on Founders Park Community Association was to work with Mr. Lambert's predecessor, Rich Baer, to get traffic calming onto North Union Street so that pedestrians would have a clear place to cross and where cars, would think about slowing down. Today, Union Street has become quite a bicycle pathway, but I'll let someone else talk about that. So when I was asked by Old Town Civic to serve on the Bicycle Advisory Committee, I think our concern was that this is a multimodal issue. So we can talk about pedestrians, but we can't talk about pedestrians without talking about cars and without talking about the bicycle problem. So for me, I am so sympathetic to Mr. Lambert. I was telling him, because every day you read about more and more problems. What's happened, unfortunately, as a society, is that technology, instead of mitigating some of our problems, has actually exacerbated it. Just in New York City alone, the number of Uber and Lyft vehicles is forcing New York to start charging a traffic congestion fee to drive around the middle city. And when they interviewed the Uber and Lyft passengers, it turned out that over 50% of them used to take a bus or the metro. But because Uber is so convenient, they don't do it any longer, so the vehicle traffic has just exploded. And now we have, coupled with that, we're trying to get people to be eco-friendly and to ride bikes, which I'm all in favor of. But now we have all these competing forces with too many bikes, bike companies, free bike companies, drop-off bikes. So the technology with bicycles is also a problem. And then finally, I'll turn this over to someone else. The other thing that technology has given us are our cell phones. So now we have distracted drivers and we have distracted pedestrians. So pedestrian statistics are not looking good. Pedestrian deaths internationally are rising, and traffic management is going to be a big problem for the country and the world.
Okay. All right. Next, we're going to hear from Jim Durham. Jim has been an Alexandrian for a long time. He's a Navy grad. Him and his family and 6 of his grandchildren reside here in Alexandria. And Jim's worked on many different commissions, the Traffic Study Task Force, along with Healthy Eating and Active Living here in Alexandria. And so his organization, BPAC, promotes walking and biking here in the city. And when I started to put this program together, about 3 or 4 different people said, well, you have Jim Durham on the panel. So Jim, take it away.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Can you hear me okay? Great. Well, Frank mentioned the Central Alexandria Traffic Study Task Force, and I've been on that task force for 2 years with Lisa, and she may say more about it, but I just want to tell you one insight that we've gotten from the city's data collection, and it goes to this traffic problem. Within Central Alexandria, 42% of the traffic, as measured, originates outside the city and ends up outside the city. We're just a pass-through. And I think if that measurement was done citywide, it would probably be over 50% when you added Washington Street, Route 1, Van Dorn as well. So yes, we can do a lot of things for those 130 vehicles registered in the city, but 50% of the traffic on our roads, I believe, or more than 50%, is coming from outside the city and not even stopping here and contributing to our economic vitality. We are just a pass-through. So I think that's an important insight from that study. And there are a couple of things I take away from that. Number one, the traffic's a regional issue. And I firmly believe that our city staff and elected leaders really need to be addressing it as a regional issue and working with the other jurisdictions, such as giving Prince George's County and Fairfax County more park and rides, van pools, and access to efficient metro bus routes. The second thing I take away is that no matter where you're from and where the vehicle came from that's on our city streets, we need to all drive responsibly, and we need to all have safe streets. So we can only survive from a safety perspective if our streets are engineered to be safe. And that's a change. One of my friends said, you know, if we didn't have all this volume, the streets we've had would probably be just fine. But with these kind of volumes that we're seeing, whether it be on arterials near where I live or in the neighborhoods like where Lisa and Frank live, this increased volumes leading to safety issues that demand that the streets be re-engineered to build in more safety. So I want to say just something a little bit about Alexandria Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. We're pretty geographically diverse. We work across the city, and I've come to appreciate, and I hope we'll get questions about different parts of the city, whether it be Southeast Old Town and Union and Royal, or Columbus Street, or Duke and West Taylor Run. I've worked in Alexandria and Del Rey, and further west, I've worked with a family whose father was killed, mother seriously injured, and crossing a crosswalk on Stevenson. There's traffic issues all over the city, and I'll be happy to take your questions on them. One of the main things we do as an organization, that's the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. We're volunteers, we promote walking and biking, and we partner with other organizations. I'm very pleased. If there's a school board member here tonight, we're excited to be a partner with Alexandria City Public Schools. We've been in there for a couple of years now promoting the education of our youth in elementary school about how to properly cross the street as a pedestrian, about how to stop for stop signs if you're a cyclist, about how to yield to pedestrians if you're a cyclist. And hopefully those lessons that they learn in elementary school will carry on in their higher education and become practices and our next generation may be a little safer on the roads than maybe we are today. So we're excited about those partnership opportunities. Another partnership organization I work with is a new one that started up this past summer. Alexandria Families for Safe Streets. It's made up of people who are, to a large extent, either crash victims, family members of crash victims, or just seriously interested in volunteering their time and effort to make our streets safer. To give you some local data to amplify what Linda referred to, in Alexandria in 2016, 4 people were killed walking. 4 pedestrians were killed in 2016. 90 were injured from traffic violence. If those had been gun violence, if we'd had 4 people killed by guns and 90 people seriously injured by guns, trust me, City of Alexandria would be totally mobilized to eliminate that problem. And I am glad that the City of Alexandria is mobilized to eliminate traffic fatalities and serious injuries. And hopefully, Mr. Lambert will talk about that. We think their Vision Zero program is the right program to go after that. In summary, I want to give you 2 insights from my work in the various activities. One, traffic volumes, a regional issue and needs to be solved on a regional basis. And re-engineering our streets for safety for everyone is the most effective and cost-effective way to eliminate the traffic violence in our city. If I could ask one thing of you when you leave tonight, is please embrace the changes the city has to make our streets safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim, for those opening thoughts. Next, we're going to hear from Jan Lambert. Many of you recognize Jan, or at least know his name. He's the Director of Transportation and Environmental Services here in the city. He joined the city in 2006 when he came to town to be the pedestrian and bicycle coordinator. So he has a lot of knowledge on this going back well over 10 years. Jan oversees the budget with over 200 employees and $50 million. And his department is in charge of planning major roadworks, sewer, transit, and infrastructure projects. So, Jan, we look forward to hearing some thoughts from you, and I know we have a lot of questions directed toward you later tonight.
I expect that, Frank. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the nice introduction, Frank. I appreciate it. I'm very happy to be here again. As Frank noted, I've been with the city for a little more than 12 years now. Actually came to the city to focus on non-motorized transportation issues. So have been working on this, personally, sort of professionally for over 20 years now. And I certainly get questions all the time from people who are asking me, how did the pedestrian bike guy end up becoming the director of the department? And I think it's a fascinating story. I think it's in many respects reflective of the way that jurisdictions like Alexandria are choosing to focus on transportation now. Alexandria has a long, strong history of smart transportation planning. One only needs to walk through communities like Old Town, in the middle of the city, Clover College Park. You've got lots of places in the city that are very well known for their walkability and accessibility to transit. But as any jurisdiction our size located in a major metropolitan area, we certainly have issues that we need to address. And we have been actively working on those issues for a number of years now. And I think I can certainly point back myself to around the 2007-2008 timetable when the city and city council at the time was looking at adopting a new transportation master plan. At that time, the city had a plan from the 1990s that was entirely road projects. Essentially, all the city's transportation funding was being geared towards transit, justifiably towards Dash and towards WMATA, but also it was looking at roadways and intersections and intersection improvements. And over time, we have managed to sort of, I would say, moderate that where we are making investments as a city to reflect that we are moving around Alexandria differently than we did 20 years ago. We have many people who choose to walk to work or choose to walk to school. We have a very comparatively high proportion of our residents who choose to use transit, who take Dash or Metrobus to get to Metro. And we also have large proportionally groups of Alexandrians who choose to bicycle. And What we've needed to do over the years is first recognize the fact that we need to be engineering our roadways differently to make sure that it's safe for them to do so. And we've done that by recognizing those uses and beginning to put some of that infrastructure on the ground. But really more dramatically, over the last couple of years, we have adopted some policy positions that will make fundamental changes in how we allocate funding and how we move around the city for a number of years. And Jim referenced that a minute ago. I'm just going to quickly sort of hold this up and make sure that I point out that in December of this past year, sorry, Jim, I don't mean to, but I figure you're okay with it. It's important to note that the Alexandria City Council adopted a plan that has a vision for within 10 years, eliminating all serious injuries or fatalities that occur from traffic crashes, and that's a very ambitious goal. And some would say it's an almost impossible goal. And we would argue that the journey is as important as the final goal. We have to be making some changes and in our thinking about how people move around the city. And the most fundamental of those is recognizing that user safety on the roadways is among the most important criteria that we have to choose what types of projects we want to fund and the types of decisions we want to make about how our roads look and feel. There are other things that are obviously important to Vision Zero. It's not just how we engineer our roads. It's very important to note that we have to do aggressive education. There's got to be enforcement involved, and then ultimately we need to evaluate what we're doing to see if what we're doing is the right thing to do and if it's successful. So I would just sort of close on that. I'm sure that there will be a number of questions for me. I know that when you start talking about mixing the types of uses that are on roadways, everybody has their own perspective, so I'm looking forward to having the conversation tonight. Thank
Great.
you.
All right. Thank you, Jan, for those opening thoughts. Next on our fourth and final panelist tonight is Lisa Porter. Lisa's a lifelong Alexandrian. Her day work is she's an attorney with the FDIC, and all the other time she's taking care of neighborhood issues as the president of the Clover College Park Homeowners Association. So we're going to hear from Lisa, and she has some interesting thoughts and comments about cut-through traffic and the way it affects different neighborhoods in Alexandria. So, Lisa, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hi. So as he said, I am the president currently of the Clover College Park Civic Association. I am the president of the Clover College Park Civic Association.
They can hear it. You cannot hear it from here because the speakers are. Okay, that's fine.
Okay. All right. And I'm going to kind of drill down what Jim talked about onto a more local level. We are a neighborhood that has kind of transformed in the last 10 years from a neighborhood where people felt safe walking down the street, allowing their kids to bike in the street. And over the last 10 years, we've undergone a metamorphosis into a cut-through neighborhood. Our neighborhood is about 500 single-family homes. We're bound by Duke Street and Janie's Lane to the north and south, and Quaker Lane and West Taylor Run to the east and west. And over the years, as traffic has begun to build up on streets like Duke and Quaker, streets within our neighborhood have become affected by both cut-through and the resulting congestion within those streets. We've been working with the city for a number of years to develop safety improvements that will make the streets safer for our residents and the two schools that we house. We house both Douglas MacArthur Elementary and Bishop Ireton High School. Both of those schools have a significant number of students who use our streets to get to either school during the day. But what our neighborhood has consistently seen is you can make a street safer, but if the street is still dangerous by the cut-through, made dangerous by the cut-through traffic, you are only solving one part of the problem. And there needs to be a policy developed within the city that is aimed at funding studies that will look at regional partners to reduce cut-through traffic through our neighborhoods. I think that we're only one of several neighborhoods within Alexandria that is facing these issues. And you know, if you don't live in a cut-through neighborhood or a neighborhood that's become a cut-through neighborhood, you're lucky, because I think with the changing dynamics and apps such as Waze that have had a significant impact on our neighborhood, it's only a matter of time before they find new routes through Alexandria. As they said, by our nature, we are a pass-through city. And as the arterial roads become clogged, those cars are going to find other ways to get through the city. And that way right now, one of the ways right now is through Clover College Park neighborhood. I also want to say that in addition to policies aimed at funding studies that look at cut-through traffic through the city, we also need to look at broadening the horizon or the area that we look at for development within the city. One example of this that came up recently is the Wegmans that is being put in at Hoffman Center. The study that went into Wegmans did not reach our neighborhood. We are less than a mile and a half from that Wegmans. I don't know about you, but I know that people drive pretty far to get to a Wegmans. Duke Street is currently backed up. Most major hours between, I would say, 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. A recent study by VDOT showed that the off-peak and on-peak traffic will soon become equal on a street like Duke. Up where we live, past Telegraph Road, in Clover College Park, needs to be studied when developments like the one near Wegmans and Hoffman Center come into play. So what our neighborhood is advocating for, on top of safety improvements, which are essential, is to also have the city partner with other regions in the Northern Virginia area and deal with ways to deal with cut-through traffic and reduction in trip volume on that basis.
Okay, thank you for those opening thoughts, Lisa. Lots of questions here, but Jan, one of the first ones that I'd like to ask is, what are complete streets? People hear that term all the time, and just define it for us. And is that concept locally, or is that a national concept, and when was it implemented into Alexandria?
That's a great question. So a complete street, the idea of a complete street is one that safely accommodates all users. So that would be a street that is safe for pedestrians, for bicyclists, for transit vehicles, for people who access transit, as well as for vehicles. Alexandria adopted a complete streets policy in 2011, and that policy was really sort of precipitated by the city's transportation master plan that recognizes that there are multiple modes that we need to accommodate. And while I would say not all jurisdictions have complete streets policies, most jurisdictions, most states now certainly do acknowledge that there are more users on our roadways than just cars. VDOT, for instance, the state transportation agency, the Virginia Department of Transportation, recognizes all the different modes when it is awarding grants and when it's looking at criteria for grants. So in short, the concept of a complete street is something that has been evolving in transportation planning and transportation traffic engineering for a number of years now, and it simply just acknowledges the fact that the space on our roads between the curbs is not necessarily just for cars anymore. It's for all people who need to traverse it to get to school, to get to work, to get to whatever errand they need to run. And there's lots of different ways that they can use that space.
Okay, thank you, Jan. One of the recent controversies in Alexandria have been putting in bike lanes on King Street and different important streets in Alexandria that's used a lot, and also the reduction of the speed limit on Quaker Lane. So, Jim or Lisa, if you have any thoughts on that from a citizen's perspective, feel free to chime in on those two hot topics.
I'll be happy to start with the King Street question. The section between T.C. Williams and Janney's Lane. I worked with a number of residents there who said, we have a lot of trouble walking along the street with high-speed traffic. We have trouble crossing the street. We really want change. And they worked with the city staff over a period of 9 months, and the city staff worked with them to develop some options that, in my talking to those people, they are very happy with. The people that live there much appreciate having a much more walkable street, a much more neighborhood characteristic street on that section of King Street. And the reality is that street handles a little bit more traffic today than it did before that project from the city. I've seen from the data. And it wasn't about the bike lanes. Let me tell you what it's like for people driving a car. For the decade prior to that project, we average 7 car crashes a year on that section of roadway. Just that section from T.C. Williams and Janney, 7 crashes a year on average for a decade. The first year the project was in place, 0 crashes. So, Frank, you and others may think of that as a bike lane project. It was all about safety. That's what Jan was talking about. And I think the results show that the safety at least in its first year, is being achieved.
Okay, good. Any thoughts on that, Lisa?
Yeah, our neighborhood did become somewhat involved in the King Street road diet that occurred there, which was the reduction of the 4 lanes to 3 and the addition of the bike lanes. One of the major issues that we had with King Street wasn't necessarily the reductions in lanes in and of itself. One of the problems that we had was the assumption that was done when the study to determine how the effect of 4 to 3 would affect the surrounding neighborhoods. It assumed that anybody heading down that portion of King Street was heading towards Old Town. Well, Janie's Lane veers off right before you hit the downward slope towards Old Town, and Janie's Lane leads to Clover College Park. And we as residents were concerned that the study was not properly taking into account how that would impact traffic in our neighborhood. And I think that has been our continuous concern. We are always in favor of making streets safer, but we are also in favor of the city conducting studies that properly assesses the impact, not just to the direct region of where the project is occurring, but the broader region.
Good, thank you. Linda, you're heavily involved with the Old Town Civic and live a few blocks from the river. Can you, and I know you've lived there for a while, can you tell us some of the changes that you've seen in the last 2 to 3 years, and also with the development of the waterfront as that's coming along?
I think the biggest change has been the volume of traffic, and which includes bicyclists. And now we're starting to come into even e-bikes. And this weekend, some of us there on Union Street observed e-scooters. So I think that the new issue for Old Town, which is very walkable, is, I think Jim talked about it. We've got to somehow get all 3 modes to understand that in a congested area like we live, we're all going to have to adopt a civilized and courteous behavior toward each other. I'm hoping that Jim's teaching young children to stop their bicycles will work, because the adults aren't doing it at all. I mean, even someone on city staff admitted to me that stopping at a stop sign when he's on his bike is too much trouble, quote, unquote. So I'm hoping that that education, but coupled with enforcement, Frank, what we're seeing is we need, like Falls Church and Arlington has adopted, which is enforcement. I'd like to see some patrol cops on bicycles. I'd like to see them to show up at stop signs. I mean, we have passed through at rush hour on St. Asaph and Royal and Pitt like you wouldn't believe it. Now, typically cars stop more than bicyclists do, but during rush hour they don't. I mean, we could make a lot of tax dollars just by ticketing there. So I think that if we're going to solve this as a community, we're going to have to somehow get people to change their behavior. New York City, for their bicyclists in 2011, and I wasn't able to talk to them, maybe you have, they adopted a program called Don't Be a Jerk. And it was for bicyclists, and it was to teach them really good behavior. So I think that if we're going to make a difference here, we've got to put education and enforcement together. And Old Town, I mean, the pedestrians are just as culpable, Frank. They're on their cell phones. They don't observe. I mean, you can put all the wonderful walk signs you want, but they ignore them. So behavior has got to be changed.
So, Jan, this is maybe 10 to 15 years ago, I believe the state had put some money forward to fund what they called an Eisenhower Avenue connector. And as you know, right now, the Eisenhower Valley is growing tremendously. And to get people from, say, Quaker Lane to the Beltway, they're stuck on Duke Street to do that. is there anything on the horizon to maybe get that connector to go through to relieve traffic, get people to Eisenhower Valley and get them off Duke Street and get them to the Beltway quicker?
So you just cut right to the chase with this. No, so it's a great question. Obviously, this is, as a community, we've grappled with the idea of connectivity and connectors and new roadways, particularly this particular project, for a number of years. No different than other communities that have similar tough conversations about new roads. Ultimately, what the city's recent plans recognize is that there are two sort of broad solutions the city has adopted to look at how people are going to move from one part of the city to another, in the Eisenhower Valley in particular. The first, as part of the landmark Van Dorn small area plan, and then also as the part of the Eisenhower West planning process. Both those planning processes identified a multimodal bridge, a connection bridge from Eisenhower Avenue near the metro station across the railroad tracks to the north. The Eisenhower West plan looked at a couple of different alignments for that bridge and has ultimately settled on one that the plan, that the current work group and the implementation group is exploring. That particular project will take quite a bit of work for the city with Norfolk Southern, but also to fund that project. Secondly, the other thing that the city's transportation master plan envisioned when it was adopted in 2009 was not an Eisenhower connector. That decision had been made by City Council a few years previous. What the city's transportation master plan really envisioned were 3 transit corridors where we would be making investments in transit to move people from one part of the city to another. So from the idea from Old Town to further west on Duke Street and also to the Eisenhower West is for a transit line similar to what we have on Route 1 that runs from Braddock through Potomac Yard and into Arlington. That's called Metroway. And the city's broader idea is that there would be 3 such transit lines where we would be making future investments that would support future land use initiatives, development approvals, and would be able to move the right number of people in the context that we desire as a city.
Thank you. Okay. Lisa, you mentioned the Waze app earlier, and with the technology that has driven traffic to a lot of side streets and things like that. But a lot of people sometimes make an argument, well, it's a public road. What do you mean it's your road? And so tell me a little bit about any comments on that, but also I've heard some other jurisdictions have tried to put in making it illegal to use a Waze app or to say no traffic comes through this street. What have you learned in that, and any discussions with the city about that?
Well, so there are 2 things. There are regions across the United States that have implemented signs such as no through traffic. I believe one California city did that. I think we've all probably heard of the Leona, New Jersey, that has blocked, all of their 60 residential streets to commuters into New York City. And then there are other jurisdictions across the county that have put up turn signals and such. For the most part, my understanding is that where those have been erected, Waze has complied and removed those streets appropriately from their traffic calculations. So the other aspect of this is, particularly in Clover College Park, one of the issues we face is if you did, for example, no left-hand turns to the streets that head to Duke, without an exemption for residents, or for example, Bishop Ireton Parent, you are still going to force all of our neighborhood's traffic back around into the mess onto Duke just to get home every night. So it seems that either way, we're in a bit of a situation where we're being punished. We have asked the city to address exemptions for residents, and we've asked it as broadly as City of Alexandria residents. We already have city decals on our cars that we pay for, and they're pretty front and center on our vehicles. We've also learned through our research that for 22 years, the City of Falls Church, which had streets that had similar issues, I think Cherry Street or Cherry Drive in Falls Church was one of them. They have had a residential exemption program in place for 22 years in that city, and I think, from what I understand, it has been largely successful, and there have been no legal challenges to that program.
Jan or Jim, one of the things that during rush hour in Alexandria, it's just a lot of people trying to leave at the same time. And there's certain intersections in the city, like if you're heading west on Duke Street at 5 o'clock, it could take you 30 minutes to go a few blocks. If citizens have questions or solutions, or I'm sorry, more important questions or problems with certain roads on certain times, what's the best way to get that on your radar and you address it? And back to the Duke Street question, is there any solution to that?
I mean, I'll take it. So, of course, if citizens have questions about traffic or about moving around the city, they can certainly contact the city. I think one thing that I would add, the city just last week actually sent out a request of residents that, and really one of the best times to contact us is when we are looking at doing street maintenance. So when you look at where the city has made investments over the last few years, one of the areas where we have really shifted our investment is to ensuring that we provide a better state of good repair for our infrastructure. And we have dramatically increased the amount of funding that we are putting into a simple programmatic area for us, which is roadway resurfacing. As few as 5 years ago, we were spending as little as $1 million a year on roadway resurfacing. We've now changed that. We're spending more than $5 million, sometimes close to $6 million a year to actually resurface our roads, to make sure that roads are in better condition for all users. And the added benefit of doing that is when we do resurface our roads, it gives us an opportunity to look at the way that that road is engineered and see if there are improvements that we can make in how traffic lanes are striped, and how the signals work, and how people cross the street, and how people access transit. So we do that through our Complete Streets program. We actually publish in advance the schedule of roadways that are planned to be resurfaced. In the city's budget, there's actually a 3-year list of streets that will be resurfaced over the next 3 years. And we actually, on the city's website, will also publish the list of streets that are going to be done over the next 2 and 3 months, so you can follow along with all of that. If you have specific questions about a road such as Duke Street or about a particular traffic intersection or signal, you are certainly welcome to contact city staff. I think the best way to do that is to use the city's Call, Click, Connect system. There are ways to make requests through that system for specific things, certainly for services. A traffic light is malfunctioning, a traffic sign is down, but you can also put requests in there, particularly through the Complete Streets program, to ask specific questions about more complicated issues.
I could just add, and I'll piggyback on that last point. The first thing we tell people is to use the city's Call, Click, Connect system to reach the transportation staff in the case of street infrastructure. The police, I met with Chief Brown last week. We discussed this issue. If you have an enforcement issue, that same system can be used to request enforcement. I will add that if you've worked with the city staff and you're not getting answers that work for you, my organization has had a lot of experience working and will help you navigate some of those issues, and we'd be happy to work with you. We have a website for the Alexandria Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. Look us up. Our contact information is there. But the first step ought to be Call, Click, Connect for either enforcement or street infrastructure.
Okay, great. So we have quite a few biking questions here. So with these bike lanes that have gone in, you've talked about, as a safety issue, but do we have many people using these bikes in Alexandria? Because a lot of people say they never see any bikers in the bike lane. And obviously, when you make plans, you plan out, decades in advance for this. So tell us a little thought, anybody who wants to, on how many bikers are in Alexandria, or any comment you see on the growth of biking, and are these bike lanes getting the use now, or are they there for future use, more importantly?
I can't answer the question of how many, although I do know we have regions in the city where we have steadily increasing numbers of people who take commuting surveys to indicate they're commuting by bike. I have neighbors on my street in Fort Williams Parkway who commute daily to DC. So I know we have increasing traffic. The other, I'll turn it over to Jan. you got any more to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly when you look at the numbers of people who are commuting by different modes in the city, we have parts of the city where we have fairly high bicycle usage. If you look at east sides of the city, particularly in Old Town, and I would say areas east of Quaker Lane, there are some parts of the city, some post office addresses or zip codes where we have 5, 6, 7, 8% of the people who are commuting on a daily basis are commuting by bicycle. And for us, we have seen a steady increase in the number of bicyclists on our roads, and we feel that that's a good thing. It's similar, I would say, to what other urban jurisdictions are seeing. Arlington is also noting similar increases. Certainly in the District of Columbia, they're noting larger proportions of cyclists. So it's good to see, and I think an important number to note is that in Alexandria we have about 560 lane miles of roads. That's how many lane miles of roads we have. About 238 center line miles of roads. When you look at the number of bike lanes that we have bike lanes on about 11 miles of roads, or about 24 lane miles total. So it's only about 4.5% of the roads in the city actually have bicycle lanes on them. So it's a fairly small number of roads in the city. But again, we continue to make those investments because we know that type of use is increasing.
Gotcha. Okay, Linda and then Jim.
Yeah, I have a couple of issues. One is that in the Old Town section, I'm seeing that bicyclists remain dispersed. In other words, I see as many bicyclists go up Duke Street as I ever see on Prince that has bike lanes. For me, and for those of us in the area, we don't really want a bike freeway. The city was looking at making Royal Street a bike freeway, but until Jim can get his bicyclist to stop at stop signs, that was going to scare us to death. I mean, like, oh my gosh, we'd never be able to cross the street from one side of Royal to the other. So for most of us, being dispersed has actually mitigated the problem to some extent. The other problem that we have are bicyclists on the sidewalks. Several years ago, City Council decided that bicyclists should be allowed on Alexandria sidewalks except King. Now, unfortunately, when tourists come, they do not know that they're not to be on the King Street sidewalks, and they're not too happy when you mention it to them. So with the advent of e-bikes, which are now in Old Town, we have an e-bike rental. And as I was saying, on Union, we were observing e-scooters that were zipping along. I think it's really, really, really important in the next year that we have ordinances. I noticed the District of Columbia has already said no e-bikes on their sidewalks or the scooters. So we're really going to be putting pedestrians, I mean, we're already dodging cars and bikes. And if we can't even walk safely on our sidewalks, we're not going to be happy.
But the second part of Frank's original question was, are we building for the future? I think of the building bikeways, whether it be bike lanes or just neighborhood streets that are comfortable to ride on because there's low speeds. I view it as we're in the early stages of building the interstate highway system. A lot of us in this room remember the interstate highway system, and you get on the road and up it ends, and you're on a U.S. road or state road. Well, I think when you will see large increases in the usage of these is when they are connected. Right now we have a lot of disconnected pieces because the city's trying to do it efficiently from a financial standpoint, and that leaves 11 out of 238 miles. So we're at the early stages, and we have to get connected facilities where you need to have bike lanes, and in other places you just need, I actually agree with Linda, dispersed, quiet neighborhood streets, low traffic volume, low traffic speeds work just as well as that.
They do. Yeah, that's what they said.
So a lot of times people will come up and see a rear-end collision, and you see a lot more of those in recent years with the texting and driving issues out there. Does anybody have any thoughts or comments on just on that topic, or how to change it, or what do you do?
Virginia state legislature needs to ban it. They need to do what Maryland, or I think DC have done.
Speaking of it.
Sorry. They need to do what Maryland and DC have done. They need to, or at least DC has done, they need to ban texting while driving in Virginia. But I don't think that's an Alexandria issue. That's unfortunately a state issue.
If I could add, that is a state issue. There's been an effort for several years to get a no handheld device in your hand law, which is the proven way to do it. The police are not really in a position to say were you using it or not, but if it's in your hand, they can tell if it's in your hand or not. And that came this close to getting passed this year, and I'm very confident, right to your elected leaders in the Richmond legislature, and that's where that problem needs to be solved.
Gotcha. Okay. Jan, one of the things, so many people drive their cars all the time, and so we encourage transportation for metro and things like that. But is there much money left to be put into building out new roadways in the city of Alexandria? The example of this question was that the city is ready to build another metro station and put a couple $100 million into that. It's more of a political question, but anybody can answer this. If you were to have a couple $100 million and we didn't do a metro station, what kind of improvements could you do with that kind of budget? And are you physically restrained every year on what you can do?
Well, I'll start. I am not an elected official, obviously. We are implementing the policies and the budgets that council proposes and adopts. So again, what I would say if you look at the policies and the plans that the city has adopted, we have been, over the last 20 years, emphasizing investments in transit. So the $300 million that's going into the new Potomac Yard Metro Rail Station is obviously very important to the city on a number of levels. The other areas of investment that the city wants to focus on are the transitway corridors, such as the West End Transitway, Metro Way, and then also Corridor B, which is Duke Street. But I would add that we have absolutely not forgotten that most of us move around Alexandria. Most of us, certainly in this room, move around on a daily basis by their car. I came here tonight. I drove a vehicle. I took the bus in this morning. I used Uber last week. I walk. I mean, obviously, I do a lot of different things to get around. But I drive, and I drive my family around. I have 2 girls that go to school here. We're very active, going from soccer and events. We recognize that we all do that. One of the areas that's most exciting for me, if you actually look in the city's budget, where we are focusing, I would say a big chunk of the state and federal grant funding that we are getting is planning for how people are going to move around the city in the future. And this is not the Jetsons. This is not 30 years from now. This is ensuring now that our traffic signals are optimized so that we can make improvements at every intersection. We are many of you might have seen long, narrow cuts in our roadways, King Street, Route 1. What we're actually doing there is we're actually connecting all the traffic signals in the city. We have more than 250 traffic signals in the city. We're connecting them all to a traffic management center. Those signals will ultimately speak to that traffic management center where we will be able to manage the signals in real time. Right now, we are putting facilities on our traffic signals to ensure that we're optimizing traffic for certain times of day. And in the not too distant future, our signals will be actually demand responsive. So they'll actually work with other signals in the area to accommodate traffic and to help people move safely through our roadways and get from one part of the city to another. And we will also be planning for the advent of vehicle to infrastructure communication and autonomous vehicles. These are all things that, while a little ways off, are certainly things that are coming and that will enable us and allow us to make more efficient use of the limited space that we have. I think one question that people ultimately have is, where are the big investments in our roads? And certainly we have some of those in the plans. It's not like we aren't investing in our roads. But a very important thing to remember is that when we make big investments in roads, when we widen roads, oftentimes we are we are encouraging more traffic and more volume on those roads. So it's important to put a lot of thought into making decisions like that and ensuring that you are preparing the fact that when you build that road, you are in some respects, you are inducing new traffic. So it's important to keep that in mind and to ensure that you are making investments like those in concert with investments in transit and in safety improvements for people to walk and bicycle as well.
Linda, you've been involved with Old Town and the Waterfront Plan through the years. I believe a summer or two ago they blocked off the lower part of King Street for pedestrians only. What is your thought on that? Has there been any rediscussion on bringing that back for a permanency?
Well, I think it still remains controversial. There are people I've spoken to just the last couple of days who like the idea. I personally don't, because I think, as Lisa points out, it just shoves the traffic up farther up onto the other streets, and they'll have more of it. What we need, as somebody keeps writing in the papers, is we need traffic management and traffic control. I see that even, I read today that even the Congo has superhighways with big intersections, and they're now having robots actually do traffic management in these very congested, dangerous intersections. So I do not want that to be a pedestrian mall. I think Harrisonburg looked at that. They looked at how Charlottesville had theirs and decided to keep theirs all open and walkable. It also provides an issue for the side streets, and it provides an issue for emergency vehicles. So I think that what we really need down there is we need more enforcement, Frank. We just need enforcement in those busy intersections.
Jan, do you have any?
I do just want to add, Linda, I couldn't agree more. And I think the city manager's budget this year proposes more enforcement. It proposes actually shifting some funds to ensure that we have more, actually 6 additional traffic enforcement officers. The city manager's budget also proposes additional funding for education and for evaluation. So we absolutely should be making these investments. And when we have made those investments in the past, they have borne fruit. They have helped make things safer for people.
So a lot of what we're hearing today is about education. And so one of the, when I got out of the car today, I looked at Jim Durham's bumper sticker. It had a bike lane and a car there, and it said, "Remember, 3 feet's the law." I never knew that. I don't know how many knew. Did anybody know that was the law? Well, a couple of people. That's good. Okay. Well, good. So, but for educational purposes, if you think about it, you get your driver's license when you're 16, and you never have to go take another exam. How do we get the typical person to learn all these laws? And has there been any discussion about when you renew a driver's license, you have to go take a test of modern rules and laws? Anybody?
Well, Frank, the basic premise of the question is that once we got our driver's license, the laws change, and as drivers, we don't have a good mechanism, and I haven't seen one in other jurisdictions. So I share the sentiment behind the question. You know, one of my favorite examples is those little chevron things with the symbol of the bike, and sometimes they're over to the side of the road, sometimes they're in the middle of the road, and if you're driving along in your car and it's a doggone cyclist that's in the middle of the road, you go, why did he get out of the way? Well, the city engineers actually use those symbols not only to designate that that's a good place to ride, but that's the position that they recommend that the cyclist ride. So if it's a narrow lane width, then the safest place is for the cyclist to ride in the center. If it's a wider lane width, then there's room for him to go over to the side. But that's an educational issue. I'd love to see an effort to go on, whether it be the 3-foot law, whether, last year the state legislature passed a law that said if you open your door in front of an oncoming bus, vehicle, bicycle, whatever, without looking, without due care, that's a traffic violation now. That's and you can be fined for that. That's due. How many knew there was a dooring law that you can be fined for your door? Okay, good. We have a very informed group of people here tonight. So I think absolutely more needs to be done, but somebody else is going to have to answer for how that's going to get done.
Gotcha. Okay. Jan, tell us about the red light cameras in the city of Alexandria. Approximately how many do we have out there, and are we going to plan on putting more?
So the state legislature actually sets the number of red light cameras that the city can have. This is one area that I would say that my department, although we work closely with the police department on it, we actually are not responsible for the oversight of red light cameras. I believe we have 4 red light cameras out in the city now. I think we are allowed to have 6 red light cameras, and we work with the police often to determine, to ensure that the locations that we have for red light cameras are the right ones. When we have made decisions about red light cameras in the past, they have been based on crash volume at those locations. It's really a combination of traffic volume, but it's also crash volume. So we're trying to focus on intersections where we know that the incidences of unsafe driving is high, and that's where we're focusing those that infrastructure.
I got you. Okay. Lisa, here's a question. Would a median on Janney's Lane help eliminate cut-through traffic?
Well, we do have a mountable median on part of Janney's Lane that narrows the roadway there. It only, as I said, covers one small part of Janney's. It starts about, I think, Cloverway Drive and then goes towards King Street. So the part of Janney's Lane that passes along from probably MacArthur Elementary School through Quaker Lane does not have a median. I am not sure that that would really affect cut-through. What it would probably affect is trip volume. Is speed. Because the medians tend to narrow the lanes further, and I think that's one of the reasons the one was done on the lower half where the hill goes downwards was to narrow, along with bike lanes, narrow the actual vehicle lane. I don't know if there is room on the rest of Janney's for a median. But
All right. So this is a question someone just wants to understand the law. If I'm driving my car and I approach a stop sign and there's a pedestrian on the corner, who has the right of way? Part 2 to the question is, if the pedestrian has got out of my way but still in the crosswalk, can I proceed?
You want to take it? Yeah, I know you love this. This is your thing.
Well, Frank, help me make sure I stay on track with the
Okay.
question. So,
You
first of all,
a pedestrian and a car
the-
approaches the
yeah.
intersection at the same
So,
time.
pedestrian and a motor vehicle or a bicycle approaches an intersection with a stop sign. They're required to stop. And the pedestrian, once it's started crossing, has the right of way. I just want to add that that's true even without the stop sign, in the sense that if the pedestrian has started to cross the street, the car is required to yield. And which answers the second part of the question, which is, once the car has yielded and the person walking is out of the way, then by state law, you're allowed to continue to go. The pedestrian does have the responsibility, by the way, to not jump out in front of traffic. So, I mean, it is a two-sided issue, but once you step off the curb with the vehicle that's well at the distance, who can see you, you can see that vehicle, the pedestrian has the right of way.
Okay. If anybody has an easy pass, who has an easy pass here on their car? Okay. So as many of you know, to get around the Beltway or head to 95 South, it's a true savior to save you so much time, and it is expensive. Has there been any discussion, Jan, on some type of system in the city of Alexandria to have an easy pass for cut-through traffic?
For cut-through traffic, no. There's not. There has been no discussion of an easy pass for cut-through traffic.
Okay. All right. Does anybody have, in reference to the Easy Pass, do any of you like to comment on anything in reference to the Easy Pass and the growth of it? Anybody have anything on that?
I think the idea of the easy pass is philosophically, it's something certainly that there is healthy debate on the idea of whether we should be allowed. The idea that there would be Lexus lanes out there for drivers is challenging for people. But certainly, the Virginia Department of Transportation has made some policy decisions. They think that it's important to invest in, and there is I would say there's a healthy case to be made that the more that we can maximize the use of the interstates, the more that we can ensure that the through traffic is using the interstates, the less likely that drivers will be to seek alternate routes.
Right.
So there are certainly, as with all of these very large public policies, there are lots of pros and cons to weigh and trade-offs. We are anxiously watching what's going to happen with 395. VDOT did a very admirable job, I think, of engaging the public and asking for input from the city and from city residents, from Arlington, from Fairfax, from all of the Northern Virginia jurisdictions on our thoughts on extending the lanes on 395. It won't be too far off that we're having a similar conversation about 495.
If I could just add, not directly an answer to the Easy Pass question, but I think Lisa can confirm that amongst the Central Alexandria Traffic Study Task Force members, we've tried to do a lot of research as to what's going on, not only in the U.S., but internationally. And there's good examples. Downtown Central Sweden is probably the best one for congestion pricing. It's been in place for years. And when you realize that for every individual to get in a single occupancy vehicle is just not going to be sustainable in the future, we do think it's time to start thinking about how do you have congestion pricing, something similar to that. I would expect to see it in DC first, but I think that's in our future. And the other thing that we've talked about are just high occupancy vehicle lanes. So part of the problem is not just the number of people that have to move, but that they're in the individual cars. But think what Route 1 or Duke and Telegraph would look like if there were a high occupancy vehicle requirement to have at least 2 people in the car. That would potentially during rush hour cut through car traffic volume in half while still moving the same number of people.
So traffic calming has taken place here in the city, and some streets, I believe Commonwealth Avenue, Russell Road, have put the speed humps or the bumps in there. How does a neighborhood apply or get one of those for traffic calming? And then I've also understood that there's also a public safety issue with it in reference to getting fire trucks and that type of thing. So any comments on that?
Sure. So and Lisa, you're welcome to jump in here anytime. The city has a prescribed process for residents who are interested in learning about what type of safety improvements or traffic calming improvements might be appropriate for their street. I hate to direct you entirely to the web, but you can actually, on the city's website, you can just put traffic calming or even speed cushion in the search menu, and you could find out what the process is. But the very short way to explain the way the process works is that if a civic association, community association, or even residents on a block were to contact us, what the city looks at is the volume on the street and then the speed of traffic that is traveling at that 85% of the vehicles on that street are traveling. That's it's a rule of thumb in the industry. That's what tells us the speed that most people that are using that roadway are traveling. And if that particular number reaches a threshold that is of concern to us, we then will proceed with the process or the prospect of considering that roadway for whether it might be eligible for speed cushions. It is important to note that vertical changes or vertical traffic calming is not appropriate on all roadways in the street. So there are some streets in the city that are primary emergency route responses that carry a more significant volume of traffic, and those roadways are not eligible for traffic calming. But when you are talking about neighborhood roadways and neighborhood connector roadways, we do look at whether those streets might be eligible for traffic calming. I would also add that speed cushions are not always the solution from our perspective. There are lots of other improvements that we might look at, and typically the first question that we are going to be asking is, what is the problem that we are trying to solve? We need to understand, and we try to work closely with neighbors and civic associations to determine specifically the problem that they are trying to solve, and then we can come up with some different types of solutions.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. We have a few more questions, and then we'll be finishing up in about another 10 to 15 minutes. So we also, after our final questions, have some closing comments from each of you. But a couple other specific questions out here. I believe Duke Street in the future has a plan to be widened. Is that correct? And would that run from like Generous George to Fox Chase?
So I think that what that question I might be referring to is the plan for Transit Corridor B, which does look at not necessarily widening Duke Street, but allocating some of the space a little bit differently on Duke Street. And certainly it was a very, I would say, involved community discussion of how we would look at some of the frontage roads on Duke Street and whether those roadways could be incorporated into space that would provide dedicated lanes for transit vehicles.
Okay. With a limited budget to pave roads, how often should I expect my residential street to be paved, and how does the city prioritize what streets get paved?
You want to take that one? I'm just kidding. So the city's current best practice is that, and actually in all urban jurisdictions, a best practice is that we would resurface every road in the city on a 10-year cycle. So 560 lane miles of roads, that means we're doing about 10% of roads on an annual basis, 56 lane miles a year. When you consider it costs roughly $100,000 in street maintenance to do a lane mile of road, you're looking at an annual budget of $5.6 million a year. We don't always get there, but we certainly do seek to try. The challenge that we have had, though, for many, many years, and this goes back well more than 15, 20 years, is that like many jurisdictions across the country, we were deferring roadway maintenance. And as I mentioned earlier, there were some years when we were investing less than $1 million in resurfacing our roads. So we were doing less than 10 lane miles a year. That simply adds up over time, and what that means is that we are trying to extend the life of our roads. We absolutely have some roadways in the city that have not seen repaving in 20 years, and some roads even longer. That is not a good situation for us to be in. That's why council has made some significant changes in how we allocate funding for roadways. Now what we do actually is we send a sort of a Google van out every 3 years, and we do a very comprehensive assessment of all 560 lane miles of roads. Every 3 years we assign a numeric grade to every road in the city from 0 to 100. And then once we assign all those grades, we take into consideration planned development projects, utility cuts, planned capital projects, and we come up with, and we also we also consider geographic equity, and then we come up with a 3-year plan that helps us focus our limited paving budget objectively to the most roads that we can on an annual basis to ensure that we're maximizing that funding. So it's a very objective process. It's about numbers and it's about data. And I could bore you and talk about resurfacing and resurfacing policy for 2 hours, but I don't think that's.
Jim, I think this one's for you. So Alexandria is a very ethnically diverse city with 100 different ethnicities. Culturally, people travel different ways, and do you sometimes see it's a challenge reaching people that are new to this country on the way they cross the streets and communicate to them on what the laws are?
Well, I guess the short answer is no. I haven't seen issues with the ethnically diverse issues having any more difficulty knowing how to cross our streets than people who have lived there their whole lives.
Another one about wheelchairs. Can the city provide strobe light flashers to folks with powered wheelchairs?
The city could. We do not currently.
Okay. All right. So what I want to do is I want to just go around the horn here, and we're going to have some final thoughts and comments. I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. This was a very great conversation. I hope the crowd got a lot out of it, and they'll be around for a few minutes after if you have any other specific questions you'd like to ask them. So, Linda, if you want to take a couple minutes for closing thoughts or comments here, that'd be wonderful.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Mr. Lambert. I just read about a new ordinance that's going to make a big difference at least in Old Town, and that is if you're doing a major project, you're not allowed to close off the sidewalk and make the pedestrian cross the street, because unfortunately on South Union we've been dodging back and forth for several years. So I'd like to ask you, is that being put in place immediately? So every new project?
Correct.
Well, so a safe sidewalk will be provided alongside where it is now, even though there's a development. So I really want to thank you for that. The other thing that I would like to impress is lighting. And I would really like to ask all of you in your neighborhoods, as a pedestrian, what's really made a difference is for people when they have a light on in the evening that lights up the sidewalk, and particularly in Old Town, that is really, really helpful. Some people put the sensor lights on. They don't want to have a light on all the time. But all of us are pedestrians. Unless we're in a wheelchair for some sad reason, from the time we can walk, which is a big deal, we are pedestrians. So I would, on the education thing, pedestrians need to be part of this, not texting. Hawaii says you can't cross the street while you're texting. So our education, I think, is critical to get people to start recognize that when you live in a crowded area where everybody wants to get somewhere quickly, we're going to have to start being nice to each other, being kind to each other, and giving way to each other voluntarily.
Thank you. What a great lead in. Because I want to say, please be a pal. Predictable, alert, and lawful. That applies to my fellow cyclists. It applies to people walking. It applies to people driving. Be a pal. Predictable, alert, and lawful.
I like that.
It's a slogan that Arlington uses.
I
We've
like
encouraged City of Alexandria to use it. I think City of Alexandria is still thinking about what its slogan is, but so until we have one, please be a pal.
I like that.
I do want to reiterate my comments from the beginning, which is our traffic volume is a regional issue. Please support our staff and elected leaders in being proactive about taking it on as a regional issue. And until we do get the traffic volumes down, we need our streets to be safe, and please support the changes necessary to do that. Thank you so much.
Jan?
I'd just like to thank you all for your great questions tonight, and note that we love getting questions like these. We encourage you to submit them to us. It's real. Jim and I were talking a little bit earlier, and I also hope that you all view the city in as a partner and as collaborative. We have challenging issues that we need to work through with all of you and with associations and neighbors across the city who have different ideas, different ways of doing things. And what we try to do is work as objectively as we can to implement the council's policies and to operate transparently and to operate also in the public interest. So I hope that you all will contact us, and I hope that you get us your questions. And I just want to put another plug in for the city's Vision Zero plan. Again, what that means, what this ultimately means as a city is that we are making foundational changes in the way that we look at our roads. And in that respect, we are being more accepting of things like congestion and delay so that we can ensure that we are reducing speeds and we are providing safer ways for people who walk or people to access transit, or bicyclists and transit vehicles, and as well as motorists. So again, we look forward to working with you and hope you'll reach out to us if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you, Jan. Lisa, some final thoughts?
So quick story. When we met with Chief Brown earlier this year, he said he had met with about 45 of the 66 civic associations and homeowners associations across the city, and traffic was number 1 or 2 on every group's list. A recent article was published that summarized the top issues for the people, the candidates running for city council this year. No one mentioned traffic. If you care about this issue, if you believe this is an issue the city needs to address and make a priority, this is the time to do it. Staff can only do what policies are set by city council and are funded appropriately by city council. So this goes back to an election issue. And if you are sick of the traffic in Alexandria, if you want increased safety, then you need to make it an election issue this year.
Okay, great. All right, well, thank all of you so much for being here. And now we're going to pass the microphone over to President Wood to close out the meeting.
All right, let's give him a hand. Thank you very much. Great questions and a wonderful panel. Thank you very much. the diversity of insights. Frankly, we all learned something from each of you. Be a pal. The rumble back here was we like that. Just voice vote. We'd probably go with that. All of us here, I think, have a responsibility. That came out clearly to all of you. Thank you for pointing the way and helping us see different perspectives from neighborhood level, from city level, even from regional level. Frank, once again, par excellence. You and Michael are moderators that we all envy. We thank you all for putting the program together. Janet, thank you very much. Frank, thank you for putting it together. A couple things I'd like to make sure that you have with you as you leave. First thing is, Donna is standing over by we have 3 prizes for the first 3 people that donate online on that computer any amount for Agenda Alexandria on Spring to Action. So the first 3 that would like to make a donation, thank you very much, Donna. Very nice, very nice. We have some T-shirts, prizes for you. Thank you for considering that. The second thing I'd ask you to do is on your table, there is a sheet that's all text. It says recommend programs. Take this sheet home with you, please, particularly those who have been with the program for a long time. Very important that we understand what issues you would like to talk about, what you'd like to talk. This is for next year's program. And we are deep into working our way through a variety of recommendations. Take it home with you and online or in contact with Donna or me. Go ahead and make a recommendation on what is on your mind and what we can do in terms of bringing new programs to Agenda Alexandria. We're ready and willing to take anything and everything, and in our consideration as a board, announce back to you, the Agenda Alexandria members, what we're going to do with next year. So take that with you. There's also a place to recommend, or volunteer for that matter, board membership. If you're interested in being part of the board, I can tell you we have energy and interest and opportunity for you. Go ahead and volunteer. We're happy to consider. In fact, we're going through a process right now to add new members to the board. We are so happy and proud of what the board does. We'd like to welcome you to be on the board. All on this one single sheet of paper. The next thing I'd point out is next program is May 21st. That is our next program, May 21st, and that is on Remember the Titans. It's about the program. It's not the football team. It's about the school that does education so well and for our community. It's really an opportunity. We've got a great lineup set for you with educators, administrators, and students that'll be part of the program and I think a part of the conversation. That's, again, May 21st. We look forward to seeing you there. Let's give this panel one more hand. Well deserved. Thank you very much for your time and your talent and your interest in what we're doing for our community. To all of you, have a very safe drive home. Thank you so much.